So feel free to sit back, relax. Joy us read fairy and folk tales of the Irish Peasantry. Edited and selected by William Butler Yeats. Introduction. Dr. Corbett, Bishop of Oxford and Norwich, lamented long ago the departure of the English fairies. In Queen Mary's time, he wrote, "When Tom came home from labour, or sis to milking rose, then merrily went their bore and merrily went their toes." But now in the times of James they had all gone, for they were of the old profession, and their songs were Ave Maries. In Ireland they are still extant, giving gifts to the kindly and plaguing the surly. "Have you ever seen a fairy of such like?" I asked an old man in County Sligo. "And I annoyed with them," was the answer. "You know, the fishermen along here know anything of the mermaids?" I asked a woman of a village in County Dublin. "Indeed, they don't like to see them. They don't like to see them at all," she answered, "for they always bring bad weather." "Here is a man who believes in ghosts," said a foreign sea captain, pointing to a pilot of my acquaintance. "In every house for there," said the pilot, pointing to his native village of Roses, "there are several. Certainly that now old and much respected dogmatist, the spirit of the age, has in no manner made his voice heard down there. In a little while, for he has gotten a consumptive appearance of late, he will be covered over decently in his grave, and another will grow, old and much respected, in his place, and never be heard of down there. And after him another and another and another. Indeed, it is a question whether any of these personages will ever be heard of outside the newspaper offices and lecture rooms and drawing rooms and eel pie houses of the cities, or if the spirit of the age is at any time more than a froth. At any rate, whole troops of their like will not change the Celt much. Giraldus Cambrensis found the people of the Western Islands a trifle paganish. "How many gods are there?" asked a priest a little while ago of a man from the island of Inistor. "There is one on Inistor, but this seems a big place," said the man, and the priest held up his hands in horror, as Giraldus had just 7 centuries before. Remember, I'm not blaming the man. It is very much better to believe in a number of gods than in none at all, or to think there is only one, but that he is a little sentimental and impractical, and not constructed for the 19th century. The Celts and his cromlechs and his pillar stones, these will not change much indeed. It is doubtful if anybody at all changes at any times. In spite of hosts of deniers and asserters, and wise men and professors, the majority still are averse to sitting down to dine 13 at table, or being helped to salt, or walking under a ladder, or seeing a single magpie flirting with his checkered tail. There are, of course, children of light who have set their faces against all this, though even a newspaper man, if you entice him into a cemetery at midnight, will believe in phantoms, for every one is a visionary, if you scratch him deep enough. But the Celt is a visionary without scratching. Yet be it noticed, if you are a stranger, you will not readily get ghost and fairy legends even in a western village. You must go adroitly to work, and make friends with the children and the old men, with those who have not felt the pressure of mere daylight existence, and those with whom it is growing less, and will have to altogether taken itself off one of these days. The old women are most learned, but will not so readily be got to talk, for the fairies are very secretive, and much resent being talked of. And are there not many stories of old women who are nearly pinched into their graves or numbed with fairy blasts? At sea, when the nets are out, and the pipes are lit, then will some ancient hoarder of tales become loquacious, telling his histories to the tune of the creaking of the boats. Holy Eve night, too, is a great time, and in old days many tales were to be heard at wakes. But the priests have set faces against wakes. In the parochial survey of Ireland, it is recorded how the storytellers used to gather together of an evening, and if any had a different version from the others, they would all recite theirs and vote, and the man who had varied would have to abide by their verdict. In this way stories have been handed down with such accuracy that the long tale of Deirdre was, in the earlier decades of the century, told almost word for word, as in the very ancient manuscript society, or in the very as in the very ancient manuscript in the Royal Dublin Society. In one case only it varied, and then the manuscript was obviously wrong. A passage had been forgotten by the copyist, but this accuracy is rather in the folk and bardic tales. This accuracy is in the folk and bardic tales than in the fairy legends, for these vary widely, being usually adapted to some neighboring village or local fairy-seeing celebrity. Each country has usually some family or personage supposed to have been favored or plagued, especially by the phantoms, as the Hacketts of Castle Hackett, Galway, who had for their ancestor a fairy, or John O'Daly of Lissadell, Sligo, who wrote Elin Arun, the song the Scotch have stolen and called Robin Adair, and which Handel would sooner have written than all his oratorios, and the O'Donoghue of Kerry. Around these men stories tended to group themselves, sometimes deserting more ancient heroes for the purpose. Round poets have they gathered, especially for poetry in Ireland has always been mysteriously connected with magic. These folktales are full of simplicity and musical occurrences, for they are the literature of a class for whom every incident in the old rut of birth, love, pain, and death has cropped up unchanged for centuries, who have steeped everything in the heart, to whom everything is a symbol. They have the spade over which man has learnt from the beginning. The people of the cities have the machine, which is prose and a parvenu. They have few events. They can turn over the incidents of a long life as they sit by the fire. With us nothing has time together meeting, and too many things are occurring for even a big heart to hold. It is said the most eloquent people in the world are the Arabs, who have only the bare earth of the desert, and a sky swept bare by the sun. Wisdom has alighted upon 3 things, goes their proverb. The hand Chinese, the brain of the Frank, and the tongue of the Arab. This, I take it, is the meaning of that simplicity sought for so much in these days by all the poets, and not to be had at any price. The most notable and typical storyteller of my acquaintance is one Paddy Flynn, a little bright-eyed old man living in a leaky one-room cottage at the village of B. The most gentle, i.e. fairy place in the whole of the county Sligo, he said, though others claim that honour for Drum-a-Hare or for Drumcliff. A very pious old man, too. You may have some time to inspect this strange figure and ragged hair if he happen to be in a devout humour, before he comes to the doings of the gentry. A strange devotion, old tales of Columkill, and what he said to his mother. How are you today, mother? Worse. May you be worse tomorrow? And on the next day, how are you today, mother? Worse. May you be worse tomorrow? And on the next, how are you today, mother? Better, thank God. May you be better tomorrow. In which undutiful manner he will tell you Columkill inculcated cheerfulness. Then most likely he will wander off into his favorite theme, how the judge smiles alike in rewarding the good and condemning the lost to unceasing flames. Very consoling does it appear to Paddy Flynn, this melancholy and apocalyptic cheerfulness of the judge. Nor seems his own cheerfulness quite earthly, though a very palpable cheerfulness. The first time I saw him, he was cooking mushrooms for himself. The next time he was asleep under a hedge, smiling in his sleep. Assuredly some joy not quite of this steadfast earth lightens in those eyes. Swift as the eyes of a rabbit, among so many wrinkles, for Paddy Flynn is very old. A melancholy there is in the midst of their cheerfulness, a melancholy that is almost a portion of their joy, the visionary melancholy of purely instinctive natures and of all animals, and the triple solitude of age and eccentricity and partial deafness. He goes about much pestered by children. As to the reality of his fairy and spirit-seeing powers, not all are agreed. One day we were talking of the banshee. I have seen it, he said, down there by the water, batting at the river with its hands. He it was who said the fairies annoyed him. Not that the skeptic is entirely afar even from these western villages. I found him one morning as he bound his corn in a merest pocket handkerchief of a field, very different from Paddy Flynn. Skepticism is every wrinkle of his face, and a traveled man, too. A foot-long Mohawk Indian tattooed on one of his arms to evidence the matter. "They who travel," says a neighboring priest, shaking his head over him, and quoting Thomas à Kempis, "seldom come home wholly." I had mentioned ghosts to the skeptic. "Ghosts," said he. "There are no such things at all, but the gentry they stand to reason. For the devil, when he fell out of heaven, took the weak-minded ones with him, and they were put into the waste places. That's what the gentry are, but they are getting scarce now because their time's over, you see, and they're going back, but ghosts, no. And I'll tell you something more. I believe in the fire of hell." Then a low voice, "It's only invented to give the priest and the parson something to do." Thereupon this man, so full of enlightenment, returning to his corn binding. The various collectors of Irish folklore have, from our point of view, one great merit, and from the point of view of others, one great fault. They have made their work literature rather than science, and told us of the Irish peasantry rather than of the primitive religion of mankind, or whatever else the folklorists are on the gad after. To be considered scientists, they should have tabulated all their tales in forms like grocers' bills. Item the fairy king, item the queen. Instead of this, they have caught the very voice of the people, the very pulse of life, each giving what was most noticed in his day. Croker and Lover, full of the ideas of scarum Irish gentility, saw everything humorized. The impulse of the Irish literature of their time came from a class that did not, mainly for political reasons, take the populace seriously, and imagine the country as a humorous Arcadia. Its passions, its gloom, its tragedy they knew nothing of. What they did was not wholly false. They merely magnified an irresponsible type, found oftenest among boatmen, carmen, and gentlemen's servants, into the type of a whole nation, and created the stage Irishman. The writers of '48 and the Famine combined burst their bubble. Their work had the dash as well as the shallowness of an ascendant and idle class. And in Croker is touched everywhere with beauty, a gentle Arcadian beauty. Carleton, a peasant, is a peasant born, as in many of his stories. I have been only able to give a few of the slightest, more especially in his ghost stories, as much more serious way with him, for all his humor. Kennedy, an old bookseller in Dublin, who seems to have had a something of genuine belief in the fairies, came next in time. He has far less literary faculty, but is wonderfully accurate, given often the very words the stories were told in. But the best book since Croker is Lady Wilde's Ancient Legends. The humor has all given way to pathos and tenderness. We have here the innermost heart of the Celt in the moments he has grown to love through years of persecution, when cushioning himself about with dreams and hearing fairy songs in twilight, he ponders on the soul and on the dead. Here is the Celt, only it is the Celt dreaming. Besides these are two writers of importance, who have published so far nothing in book shape, Miss Letitia McClintock and Mr. Douglas Hyde. Miss McClintock writes accurately and beautifully the half-Scotch dialect of Ulster, and Mr. Douglas Hyde is now preparing a volume of folk tales in Gaelic, having taken them down for the most part, word for word, among the Gaelic speakers of Roscommon and Galway. He is perhaps most to be trusted of all. He knows the people thoroughly. Others see a phase of Irish life. He understands all its elements. His work is neither humorous nor mournful. It is simply life. I hope he may put some of his gatherings into ballads, for he is the last of our ballad writers of the school of Walsh and Cullinan, men whose work seems fragrant with turf, smoke, and this brings to mind the chapbooks. They are to be found brown with turf smoke on cottage shelves, and are, or were, sold on every hand by the pedlars, but cannot be found in any library of this city of the Sassenach. The royal fairy tales, the Hibernian tales, and the legends of the fairies are the fairy literature of the people. Several specimens of our fairy poetry are given. It is more like the fairy poetry of Scotland than of England. The personage of English fairy literature are merely in most cases mortals, beautifully masquerading. Nobody ever believed in such fairies. They are romantic bubbles from Provence. Nobody ever laid new milk on their doorstep for them. As to my own part in this book, I have tried to make it representative as far as so few pages would allow, of every kind of Irish folk faith. The reader will perhaps wonder why that in all my notes I have not rationalized a single hobgoblin. I seek for shelter to the words of Socrates. Phaedrus, I should like to know, Socrates, whether the place is not somewhere here at which Boreas is said to have carried off Orithia from the banks of Evalysus. Socrates, that is the tradition. Phaedrus, and is this the exact spot? The little stream is delightfully clear and bright. I can fancy that there might be maidens playing near. Socrates, I believe the spot is not exactly here, but about a quarter of a mile lower down, where you cross to the temple of Artemis, and I think there is some sort of an altar of Boreas in that place. Phaedrus, I do not recollect, but I beseech you to tell me, Socrates, do you believe this tale? Socrates, the wise are doubtful, and I should not be singular if, like them, I also doubted. I might have a rational explanation that Orithia was playing with Pharmacia when a northern gust carried her over the neighboring rocks, and this being the manner of death, was said to have been carried away by Boreas. There is a discrepancy, however, about the locality. According to another version of the story, she was taken from the Areopagus, and not from this place. Now I quite acknowledge that these allegories are very nice, but he is not to be envied who has to invent them. Much labor and ingenuity will be required of him, and we has once begun, he must go on and rehabilitate centaurs and chimeras dire, gorgons and winged steeds flow in apace, and numberless other inconceivable and portentous monsters. And if he is skeptical about them, and would fain reduce them one after another to the rules of probability, this sort of crude philosophy will take up all his time. Now, I have certainly not time for such inquiries. Shall I tell you why? I must first know myself, as the Delphian inscription says, to be curious about that which is not my business, while I am still in ignorance of my own self, would be ridiculous. And therefore I say farewell to all this. The common opinion is enough for me, for as I was saying, I want to know not about this, but about myself. Am I indeed a wonder more complicated about and swollen with passion than the serpent Typho, or a creature of gentler and simpler sort, to whom nature has given it a diviner and lowlier destiny? I have to thank Messrs. Macmillan and editors of Belgravia all the year round and monthly packet for leave to quote from Patrick Kennedy's legendary fictions of the Irish Celts, and Miss McClintock's articles respectively. Lady Wilde for leave to give what I would from her Ancient Legends of Ireland, Ward and Downey, and Mr. Douglas Hyde for his 3 unpublished stories, and for valuable and valued assistance in several ways, and also Mr. Allingham and other copyright holders for their poems. Mr. Allingham's poems are from Irish Songs and Poems, Reeves and Turner, Ferguson's from Seal, Byers and Walker's Shilling reprint, my own and Miss O'Leary's from Ballads and Poems of Young Ireland, 1888, a little anthology published by Gill and Sons, Dublin. William Butler Yeats. The Trooping Fairies. The Irish word for fairy is sheohog, a diminutive of she in banshee. Fairies are Ardeenshee, fairy people. Who are they? Fallen angels who were not good enough to be saved, nor bad enough to be lost, say the peasantry. The gods of the earth, says the Book of Armagh. The gods of pagan islands, said the Irish antiquarians. The Tuatha De Danann, who, when no longer worshipped and fed with offerings, dwindled away in popular imagination and now are only a few spans high. And they will tell you in proof that the names of fairy chiefs are the names of old Danann heroes, and the places where they especially gathered together Danann bearing places, and that the Tuatha De Danann used to be called the Sloshi, the fairy host, or Makrashi, the fairy cavalcade. On the other hand, there is much evidence to prove them fallen angels. Witness the nature of the creatures, their caprice, their way of being good, of being good to the good and evil to the evil, having every charm but conscience consistency, being so quickly offended that you must not speak much about them at all, and never call them anything but the gentry, or else doin math, which in English means good people, yet so easily pleased they will do their best to keep misfortune away from you. If you leave a little milk for them on the window sill overnight, on the whole, the popular belief tells us most about them, telling us how they fell, and yet were not lost, because their evil was wholly without malice. Are they the gods of the earth? Perhaps. Many poets and all mystic and occult writers in all ages and countries have declared that behind the visible are chains on chains of conscious beings, who are not of heaven but of earth, who have no inherent form but change according to their whim, or the mind that sees them. You cannot lift your hand without influencing and being influenced by hordes. The visible world is merely their skin. In dreams we go amongst them and play with them and combat with them. They are perhaps human souls in the crucible, these creatures of whim. Do not think the fairies are always little. Everything is capricious about them, even their size. They seem to take what size or shape pleases them. Their chief occupations are feasting, fighting, and making love, and playing the most beautiful music. They have only one industrious person amongst them, the leprechaun, the shoemaker. Perhaps they wear their shoes out with dancing. Near the village of Balasadere is a little woman who lived amongst them 7 years. When she came home, she had no toes, she had danced them off. They have 3 great festivals in the year: May Eve, Midsummer Eve, November Eve. On May Eve, every 7th year, they fight all around, but mostly on the plain of Abon, whatever that is, for the harvest, for the best years of grain belong to them. An old man told me he saw them fight once. They tore the thatch off a house in the midst of it all. Had anyone else been near, they would merely have seen a great wind whirling everything into the air as it passed. When the wind makes the straws and leaves whirl as it passes, that is the fairies and the peasantry take off their hats and say, God bless them. On Midsummer Eve, when the bonfires are lighted on every hill in honor of St. John, the fairies are at their gayest, and sometimes steal away beautiful mortals to be their brides. On November Eve, they are at their gloomiest, for according to the old Gaelic reckoning, this is the first night of winter. This night they dance with the ghosts, and the puka is abroad, and witches make their spells, and girls set a table with food in name of the devil, that the fetch of their future lover may come through the window and eat of the food. After November Eve, the blackberries are no longer wholesome, for the puka has spoiled them. When they are angry, they paralyze men and cattle with their fairy darts. When they are gay, they sing. Many a poor girl has heard them and pined away and died for love of that singing. Plenty of the old beautiful tunes of Ireland are only their music, caught up by eavesdroppers. No wise peasant would hum the pretty girl milking the cow near a fairy rath, for they are jealous and do not like to hear their songs on clumsy mortal lips. Carolan, the last of the Irish bards, slept on a rath, and ever after the fairy tunes ran in his head, and made him the great man he was. Do they die? Blake saw a fairy's funeral, but in Ireland we say they are immortal. The fairies. William Allingham. Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen. We daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. Wee folk, good folk, trooping all together. Green jacket, red cap, and white owl's feather. Down along the rocky shore some make their home. They live on crispy pancakes or yellow tide foam. Some in the reeds of the Black Mountain Lake, with frogs for their watchdogs all night awake. High on the hilltop the old king sits. He is now so old and grey he nigh lost his wits. With a bridge of white must Ullum kill he crosses, on his stately journeys from Sleeveleague to Rosses, or going up with music on cold starry nights to sup with the queen of the gay northern lights. They stole little Bridget for 7 years long. When she came down again, her friends were all gone. They took her lightly back between the night and morrow. They thought that she was fast asleep, but she was dead with sorrow. They have kept her ever since deep within the lake, on a bed of flag leaves, watching till she wake. By the craggy hillside through the mosses bare, they have planted thorn trees for pleasure here and there. Is any man so daring as dig them up in spite, he shall find their sharpest thorns in his bed tonight. Up the fairy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. Wee folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and white owl's feather. Frank Martin and the Fairies, by William Carleton. Martin was a thin, pale man when I saw him, of a sickly look and a constitution naturally feeble. His hair was a light auburn, his beard mostly unshaven, and his hands of a singular delicacy and whiteness, owing, I dare say, as much to the soft and easy nature of his employment as to his infirm health. In everything else he was as sensible, sober, and rational as any other man, but on the topic of fairies, the man's mania was peculiarly strong and immovable. Indeed, I remember that the expression of his eyes were singularly wild and hollow, and his long, narrow temples sallow and emaciated. Now this man did not lead an unhappy life, nor did the malady he labored under seem to be productive of either pain or terror to him, although one might be apt to imagine otherwise. On the contrary, he and the fairies maintained the most friendly intimacy, and their dialogues, which I fear were woefully one-sided ones, must have been a source of great pleasure to him, for they were conducted with much mirth and laughter on his part at least. "Well, Frank, do you see the fairies?" "Whist, there's two dozen of them in the shop, the weaving shop. This minute, there's a little old fellow sitting on the top of the sleighs, and all to be rocked while I'm weaving. The sorrow's in them. But they're the greatest little scammers alive. They are, but there is another of them at my dressing noggin. Get out of that, you shingon, or bad cess to me. If you don't, I'll leave you a mark. Hack, ha, cut, you thief, you." "Frank, aren't you afeard of them?" "Is it me, or what I be afeard of them for? They have no power over me." "Why haven't they, Frank?" "Because I was baptized against them." "What do you mean by that?" "Why, the priest that christened me was told by my father to put the proper prayers against the fairies, and a priest can't refuse it when he's asked, and he did so. Begorra, it's well for me that he did. Let the towel alone, you little glutton. See, there's a weeny thief o' there, eatin' my tallow. Because, you see, it was their intention to make me king of the fairies." "Is it possible?" "Devil a lie in it." "Sure, you may ask them, and they'll tell you." "What size are they, Frank?" "Oh, the little wee fellows, with green coats, and the purtiest little shoes you ever see. There's two of them, both old acquaintances of mine, running along the yarn beam. And that old fellow with the bob wig is called Jim Jam, and the other chap with the three-cocked hat is called Nicky Nick. Nicky plays the pipes. Nicky, give us a tune, or I'll malavore you. Come now. Luff air and shore. Whist now, listen." The poor fellow, though weaving as fast as he could all the time, yet bestowed every possible mark of attention to the music, and seemed to enjoy it as much as if it had been real. But who can tell whether that which we look upon as a privation may not, after all, be a fountain of increased happiness, greater perhaps than any which we ourselves enjoy? I forget who the poet is who says, "Mysterious are thy laws, the vision's finer than the view. Our landscape nature never drew so fair as fancy draws." Many a time when a mere child, not more than 6 or 7 years of age, have I gone as far as Frank's weaving shop, in order, with a heart divided between curiosity and fear, to listen to his conversation with the good people. From morning till night his tongue was going almost as incessantly as his shuttle, and it was well known that at night, whenever he awoke out of his sleep, the first thing he did was to put out his hand and push them, as it were, off his bed. Get out, you thieves. Out on this now, and leave me alone." "Nicky, this ain't had time to be playing the pipes. He wants to sleep. Go off now, troth yez do. You'll see what I'll give yez tomorrow. Sure, I'll make new dressings, and if yez behave indecently, where'll I have yez the scraping o' the pot? There now. Which poor things. They're decent crathers. Sure they're all gone, barring poor Redcap. That doesn't like to leave me. And then the harmless monomaniac would fall back into what we trust was an innocent slumber. About this time there were said to have occurred a very remarkable circumstances which gave poor Frank a vast deal of importance among the neighbors. A man named Frank Thomas, the same in whose house Mickey McRory held the first dance at which I ever saw him, as detailed in a former sketch. This man, I say, had a child sick, but of what complaint I cannot now remember, nor is it of any importance. One of the gables of Thomas's house was built against, or rather into, a Forth or Rath, called Towny or properly Tonnog Forth. It was said to be haunted by the fairies, and what gave it a character peculiarly wild in my eye was that there were on the southern side of it 2 or 3 little green mounds, which were said to be the graves of unchristened children, over which it was considered dangerous and unlucky to pass. At all events, the season was midsummer, and one evening about dusk, during the illness of the child, the noise of a handsaw was heard upon the Froth. This was considered rather strange, and after a little time a few of those who were assembled at Frank Thomas's went to see who it could be that was sawing in such a place, or what they could be sawing at so late an hour, for everyone knew that nobody in the whole country about them would dare to cut down the few white thorns that grew upon the Forth. Going to examine, however, judge of their surprise, when after surrounding and searching the whole place, they could discover no trace of either saw or sawer. In fact, with the exception of themselves, there was no one, either natural or supernatural, visible. They then returned to the house and had scarcely sat down, when it was heard again within 10 yards of them. Another examination of the premises took place, but with equal successes. Now, however, while standing on the Forth, they heard the sawing in a little hollow, about 150 yards below them, which was completely exposed to their view, but they could see nobody. A party of them immediately went down to ascertain, if possible, what this singular noise and invisible labor could mean. But on arriving at the spot, they heard the sawing, to which were now added hammering, and the driving of nails upon the froth above, whilst those who stood on the froth continued to hear it in the hollow. On comparing notes, they resolved to send down to Billy Nelson's for Frank Martin, a distance of only about 80 or 90 yards. He was soon on the spot, and without a moment's hesitation solved the enigma. "'Tis the fairies," said he. "I see them, and busy crathers they are." "What are they sawing, Frank?" "They're making a child's coffin," he replied. "They have the body already made. Now they're nailing the lid together. That night the child died, and the story goes that on the second evening afterwards, the carpenter who was called upon to make the coffin brought a table out from Thomas's house to the Forth as a temporary bench, and it said that the sawing and hammering necessary for the completion of his task were precisely the same which had been heard the evening but one before, neither more nor less. I remember the death of the child myself and the making of its coffin, but I think the story of the supernatural carpenter was not heard in the village for some months after its interment. Frank had every appearance of a hypochondriac about him. At the time I saw him, he might be about 34 years of age, but I do not think from the debility of his frame and infirm years that he has been alive for several years. He was an object of considerable interest and curiosity, and often have I been present when he was pointed out to strangers, the man that could see the good people. The Priest's Supper by T. Crofton Croker. It is said by those who ought to understand such things that the good people or the fairies are some of the angels who were turned out of heaven, and who landed on their feet in this world, while the rest of their companions, who had more sin to sink them, went down further to a worse place. Be this as it may, there was a merry troop of the fairies dancing and playing all manner of wild pranks on a bright moonlight evening towards the end of September. The scene of their merriment was not far distant from Inchigeela, in the west of the county Cork, a poor village, although it had a barrack for soldiers, but great mountains and barren rocks, like those round about it, are enough to strike poverty into any place. However, as the fairies can have anything they want for wishing, poverty does not trouble them much, and all their care is to seek out unfrequented nooks and places, where it is not likely anyone will come to spoil their sport. On a nice green sod by the river's side, were the little fellows dancing in a ring as gaily as may be, with their red caps wagging about at every bound in the moonshine, and so light were these bounds that the lobs of dew, although they trembled under their feet, were not disturbed by their capering. Thus did they carry on their gambols, spinning round and round, and twirling and bobbing and diving, and going through all manner of figures, until one of them chirped out, "Cease, cease with your drumming, here's an end to our mumming. By my smell I can tell a priest this way is coming." And away every one of the fairies scampered off as hard as they could, concealing themselves under the green leaves of the lusmore, where if their little red caps should happen to peep out, they would only look like its crimson bells, and more hid themselves at the shady side of stones and brambles, and others under the bank of the river, and in holes and crannies of one kind or another. The fairy speaker was not mistaken, for along the road which was within view of the river came Father Horrigan on his pony, thinking to himself that as it was so late he would make an end of his journey at the first cabin he came to. According to his determination, he stopped at the dwelling of Dermond Leary, lifted the latch, and entered with, "My blessing on all here." I need not say that Father Horrigan was a welcome guest, wherever he went, for no man was more pious or better beloved in the country. Now it was a great trouble to Dermond that he had nothing to offer his reverence for supper as a relish to the potatoes, which the old woman, for so Dermond called his wife, though she was not much past 20, had down boiling in a pot over the fire, which thought of the net which had set in the river. But as it had been only there a short time, the chances were against his finding a fish in it. No matter, thought Dermond, there can be no harm in stepping down to try, and maybe as I want the fish for the priest's supper, that one will be there before me. Down the riverside went Dermond, and he found in the net as fine a salmon as ever jumped in the bright waters of the spreading Lee. But as he was going to take it out, the net was pulled from him. He could not tell how or by whom, and away got the salmon, and went swimming along with the current as gaily as if nothing had happened. Dermond looked sorrowfully at the wake which the fish had left upon the water, shining by a line of silver in the moonlight, and then with an angry motion of his right hand and a stamp of his foot, gave vent to his feelings by mutterings, "May bitter bad luck attend you night and day for a blackguard schemer of a salmon, wherever you go. You ought to be ashamed of yourself if there's any shame in you to give me the slip after this fashion. I'm clear in my own mind that you'll come to no good, for some kind of evil thing or other helped you. Did I not feel it pull the net against me as strong as the devil himself?" "That's not true for you," said one of the little fairies who had scampered off at the approach of the priest, coming up to Dermond Leary with a whole throng of companions at his heels. "There was only 12.5 of us pulling against you." Dermond gazed at the tiny speaker with wonder, who continued, "Make yourself no ways uneasy about the priest's supper. For if you will go back and ask him one question from us, it'll be as fine a supper as ever was put on a table spread out before him in less than no time." "I'll have nothing at all to do with you," replied Dermond in a tone of determination. He added, "I'm much obliged to you for your offer, sir, but I know better than to sell myself to you or the like of you for a supper. And more than that, I know Father Horrigan has more regard for my soul than to wish me to pledge it forever, out of regard to anything that you could put before him. So there's an end of the matter." The little speaker, with a pertinacity not to be repulsed by Dermond's manner, continued, "Will you ask the priest one civil question for us?" Dermond considered for some time, and he was right in doing so, but he thought that no one could come to harm out of asking a civil question. "I see no objection to that same gentleman," said Dermond, "but I will have nothing in life to do with your supper, mind that." "Then," said the well-speaking fairy, whilst the rest come crowding after from all parts, "go and ask Father Horrigan to tell us whether our souls be saved at the last day, like the souls of good Christians, and if you wish us well, bring back word what he says without delay." Away went Dermond to his cabin, where he found the potatoes thrown out on the table, and his good woman handing the biggest of them all, the beautiful laughing red apple smoking like a hard-ridden horse on a frosty night over the Father Horgan. Please, your reverence, said Dermot. Just a minute, may I make bold to ask you honor one question? What may that be? Said Father Horgan. Why then, begging your reverence pardon for my freedom, it is, if the souls of the good people are to be saved at the last day. Who bid you ask me that question, Leary? Said the priest, fixing his eyes upon him sternly. Dermot could not stand before it all. I'll tell no lies about the matter, and nothing in life but the truth, said Dermot. It's the good people themselves who sent me to ask the question. And there they are in the thousands down on the bank of the river, waiting for me to go back with the answer. Go back by all means, said the priest, and tell them, if they want to know, to come here to ask me themselves, and I'll answer that or any other question they are pleased to ask with the greatest pleasure in life. Dermot according returned to the fairies, who came swarming round about him to hear what the priest said in reply, and Dermot spoke out among them like a bold man as he was. They heard that they must go to the priest. Away they fled, some here and more there, and some this way or more that, whisking by poor Dermot so fast and in such numbers that he was quite bewildered. When he came to himself, which was not for a long time, back he went to his cabin and ate his dry potatoes along with Father Horrigan, who made quite light of the thing. But Dermot could not help thinking it a mighty hard case that his reverence, whose words had the power to banish the fairies at such a rate, should have no sort of relish to his supper, and that the fine salmon he had in the net should have been got away from him in such a manner. The Fairy Well of Llanganay by Samuel Ferguson. Mournfully sing, mournfully, oh listen, Ellen, sister dear. Is there no hope at all for me, only ceaseless sigh and tear? Why did not he who left me here, with solemn hope steal memory? Oh listen, Ellen, sister dear, mournfully, sing mournfully. I'll go away to Slemish Hill, I'll pluck the fairy hawthorn tree, and let the spirits work their will. I care not if for good or ill, so they but lay the memory, which all my heart is haunting still, mournfully sing mournfully. The fairies are a silent race, and pale as lily flowers to see. I care not for a blanched face, for wandering in a dreaming place, so I but banish memory. I wish I were with Anna Grace, mournfully sing mournfully. Hearken to my tale of woe, 'twas thus to weeping Ellen Con. Her sister said in accents low, her only sister Unaban. 'Twas in their bed before the dawn, and Ellen answered sad and slow, O Una, Una, be not drawn, hearken to my tale of woe. To this unholy grief I pray, which makes me sick at heart to know, and I will help you if I may, the fairy well of Llanganay. Lie nearer me, I tremble so, Una, I've heard wise women say, hearken to my tale of woe, that if before the dews arise, true maiden in its icy flow with pure hand bathe her bosom thrice. 3 lady brackens pluck likewise, and 3 times round the fountain go. She straight forgets her tears and sighs. Hearken to my tale of woe. All alas and well away, O sister Ellen, sister sweet. Come with me to the hill, I pray, and I will prove that blessed freet. They rose with soft and silent feet. They left their mother where she lay, their mother and her care discreet, all alas and well away. And soon they reached the fairy well, the mountain's eye, clear, cold, and grey. Wide open in the dreary fell, how long they stood, 'twere fain to tell. At last upon the point of day, Bon Una bears her bosom swell, all alas and well away. Thrice o'er her shrinking breast she laves the gliding glance that will not stay, of subtly streaming fairy waves. And now the charm 3 brackens craves, she plucks them in their fringed array. Now round the well her fate she braves, all alas and well away. Save us all from fairy thrall, Ellen sees her face the rim twice and thrice, and that is all. Fountain, hill, and maiden swim, all together melting dim. Una, Una, thou mayest call, sister sad, but lithe or limb, save us from fairy thrall. Never again of Unaban, where now she walks in dreamy hall, shall eye of mortal looked upon. Can it be the guard was gone, the better guard than shield or wall? Who knows on earth save Durladon, save us all from the fairy thrall. Behold, the banks are green and bare, no pit is here wherein to fall. Aye, at the fount you may stare, but not save pebbles smooth it's there, and small straws twirling one and all. Hie thee home, and be thy prayer, save us all from fairy thrall. Just a moment. Alright. Tig O'Ken and the Corpse. Literally translated from the Irish by Douglas Hyde. I found it hard to place Mr. Douglas Hyde's magnificent stories among the ghosts or the fairies. It is among the fairies on the grounds that all these ghosts' bodies were in no manner ghosts and bodies, but pishogs, fairy spells. One often hears of these visions in Ireland. I have met a man who had lived a wild life like the man in the story, till a vision came to him in county one dark night, and no way so terrible a vision as this, but sufficient to change his whole character. He will not go out at night. If you speak to him suddenly, he trembles. He has grown timid and strange. He went to the bishop and was sprinkled with holy water. It may have come as a warning, said the bishop. Yet great theologians are of opinion that no man ever saw an apparition, for no man would survive it. There was once a grown-up lad in the county Leitrim, and he was strong and lively and the son of a rich farmer. His father had plenty of money, and he did not spare it on the son. Accordingly, when the boy grew up, he liked sport better than work, and as his father had no other children, he loved this one so much that he allowed him to do in everything just as it pleased himself. He was very extravagant, and he used to scatter the gold money as another person would scatter the white. He was seldom to be found at home, but if there was a fair or a race or a gathering within 10 miles of him, you were dead certain to find him there. And he seldom spent a night in his father's house. But he used to be always out rambling, and like Sean Bui long ago, there was Grad Gakga Glen Emerald. Yeah, I'm not going to attempt to read the Gaelic. Sorry. The love of every girl in the breast of his shirt, and it's many's the kiss he got and he gave, for he was very handsome, and there wasn't a girl in the country but would fall in love with him, only for him to fasten his 2 eyes on her, and it was for that someone made this ran on him. Look at the rogue, it's for kisses he's rambling. It isn't much wonder, for that was his way. He's like an old hedgehog. At night he'll be scrambling from this place to that, but he'll sleep in the day. At last he became very wild and unruly. He wasn't to be seen day or night in his father's house, but always rambling or going on his Cayley night visit from place to place, from house to house, so that the old people used to shake their heads and say to one another, "It's easy seen what will happen to the land when the old man dies. His son will run through it in a year, and it won't stand him that long itself." He used to be always gambling and card playing and drinking, but his father never minded his bad habits, and never punished him. But it happened one day that the old man was told that the son had ruined the character of a girl in the neighborhood, and he was greatly angry, and he called the son to him, and said to him quietly and sensible, "Avik," said he, "you know I loved you greatly up to this. I never stopped you from doing your choice thing, whatever it was, and I kept plenty of money with you. And I always hoped to leave you the house and land, and all I had after myself would be gone. Why, I heard a story of you today that has disgusted me with you. I cannot tell you the grief that I felt when I heard such a thing of you. And I tell you now plainly that unless you marry that girl, I'll leave house and land and everything to my brother's son. I never could leave it to anyone who would make so bad a use of it as you do yourself, deceiving women and coaxing girls. Settle with yourself now whether you'll marry that girl and get my land as a fortune with her, or refuse to marry her and give up all that was coming to you, and tell me in the morning which of the two things you have chosen. Ach. Dumno Shiri, father, you wouldn't say that to me, and I such a good son as I am. Who told you that I wouldn't marry the girl, says he. But his father was gone, and the lad knew well enough that he would keep his word too, and he was greatly troubled in his mind, for as quiet and as kind as the father was, he never went back of a word that he had once said, and there wasn't another man in the country who was harder to bend than he was. The boy did not know rightly what to do. He was in love with the girl indeed, and he hoped to marry her some time or other, but he would much sooner have remained another while as he was, follow on his old tricks, drinking, sporting, and playing cards, and along with that he was angry that his father should order him to marry, and should threaten him if he did not do it. Isn't my father a great fool, says he to himself. I was ready enough, and only too anxious to marry Mary. And now, since he threatened me, faith, I've a great mind to let it go another while. His mind was so much excited that he remained between two notions as to what he should do. He walked out into the night at last to cool his heated blood, and went on to the road. He lit a pipe, and as the night was fine, he walked and walked on until the quick pace made him begin to forget his trouble. The night was bright and the moon half full. There was not a breath of wind blowing, and the air was calm and mild. He walked on for nearly 3 hours when suddenly he remembered that it was late in the night, and time for him to turn in. Pshaw, I think I forgot myself, says he. Must be near 12 o'clock now. The word was hardly out of his mouth when he heard the sound of many voices and the trampling of feet on the road before him. I don't know who be's out so late at night as this, and on such a lonely road, said he to himself. He stood listening, and he heard the voices of many people talking through other, but he could not understand what they were saying. Oh, Vera, says he, I'm afraid. It's not Irish or English they have. It can't be, they're Frenchmen. He went on a couple of yards further. He saw well enough by the light of the moon a band of little people coming towards him. They were carrying something big and heavy with them. Oh, murder, says he to himself. Sure it can't be that they're the good people that's in it. A rib of hair that was on his head stood up, and there fell a shaking on his bones, for he saw that they were coming to him fast. He looked at them again, and perceived that there were about 20 little men in it, and there was not a man at all of them higher than about 3 feet or 3 feet and a half, and some of them were grey and seemed very old. He looked again, but he could not make out what it was the heavy thing they were carrying until they came up to him. Okay, sorry. They threw the heavy thing down on the road, and he saw on the spot that it was a dead body. He became as cold as the death, and there was not a drop of blood running in his veins, when an old little grey manine came up to him and said, Isn't it lucky we met you, T. O'Kane? Poor T could not bring out a word at all, nor open his lips if he were to get the word for it. So we gave no answer. T. O'Kane, it's the little grey man again. Isn't it timely you met us? T could not answer him. T. O'Kane, says he, third time. Isn't it lucky and timely that we met you? Teague remained silent, for he was afraid to return an answer, and his tongue was as if it was tied to the roof of his mouth. The little grey man turned to his companions, and there was joy in his bright little eye. And now, said he, Teague O'Kane hasn't a word. We can do with him what we please. Teague, see, you're living a bad life, and we can make a slave of you now. And you cannot withstand us, for there's no use in trying to go against us. Lift that corpse. Teague was so frightened that he was only Well, to utter the two words, "I won't." For as frightened as he was obstinate and stiff the same as ever. "Teague O'Kane won't lift the corpse," said the little man, with a wicked little laugh, for all the world like the breaking of a lock of dry kippins, with a striking harsh voice like the striking of a cracked bell. "Teague O'Kane won't lift the corpse. Make him lift it." Before the word was out of his mouth, they had gathered around poor Teague, they all talking and laughing through weather. Teague tried to run from them, but they followed him, and a man of them stretched out his foot before as he ran, so that Teague was thrown in a heap on the road. Then, before he could rise up, the fairies caught him, some by the hands and some by the feet, and they held him tight, in a way that he could not stir, with his face against the ground. 6 or 7 of them raised the body then, and pulled it over to them, and left it down on his back. The breast of the corpse was squeezed against Teague's back and shoulders, and the arms of the corpse were thrown around Teague's neck. Then they stood back from him a couple of yards, and let him get up. He rose, foaming at the mouth and cursing, and he shook himself, thinking to throw the corpse off his back. But his fear and his wonder were great when he found that the 2 arms had a tight hold round his own neck, and that the 2 legs were squeezing his hips firmly. That however strongly he tried, he could not throw it off, any more than a horse can throw off its saddle. He was terribly frightened then, and he thought he was lost. "Gone forever," said he to himself. "It's the bad life I'm leading that has given the good people this power over me. I promised to God and Mary and Peter and Paul, Patrick and Bridget, will mend my ways for as long as I have to live. If I come clear out of this danger, and I'll marry the girl." Grey Man came up to him again and said to him, "Now, Teakin," says he, "you didn't lift the body when I told you to lift it. And see how you were made to lift it. Perhaps when I tell you to bury it, you won't bury it until you're made to bury it." "Anything at all I could do for your honor," said Terry, "I'll do it." He was getting sense already. If it had not been for the great fear this was on him, he would never have let that civil words slip out of his mouth. The old man laughed a sort of laugh again. "We're getting quiet now, Teague," says he. "I'll go bail you, but you'll be quiet enough before I'm done with you. Listen to me now, Teague O'Kane. If you don't obey me in all I'm telling you to do, you'll repent it. You must carry with you this corpse that is on your back to Temple Dumas, and you must bring it to the church with you, and make a grave for it in the very middle of the church. And you must raise up the flags and put them down up in the very same way, and you must carry the clay out of the church and leave the place as it was when you came, so that no one could know that there had been anything changed. But that's not all. Maybe that the body won't be allowed to be buried in the church. Perhaps some other man has the bed. If so, it's likely he won't share it with this one. If you don't get leave to bury it in Tipuldamus, you must carry it to Carrick Fad Vicoris and bury it in the churchyard there. If you don't get into that, take it with you to Temple Ronan. And if that churchyard is closed, take it to Logfada. And if you're not to bury it there, you've no more to do than to take it to Kilbrida, and you can bury it there without hindrance. Cannot tell you what one of those churches is the one where you will have leave to bury that corpse into the clay, but I know that it will be allowed you to bury him at some church or other of them. If you do this work rightly, we will be thankful to you, and you will have no cause to grieve. But if you are slow or lazy, believe me, we shall take satisfaction of you." When the little grey man had done speaking, his comrades laughed and clapped their hands together. "Lick, lick, wee, wee," they all cried. Go on, you have 8 hours before you till daybreak. If you haven't this man buried before the sun rises, you're lost." They struck a fist and foot behind on him, and drove him on the road. He was obliged to walk, and to walk fast, for they gave him no rest. He thought himself that there was not a wet path, or a dirty boreen, or a crooked contrary road in the whole county that he had not walked that night. The night was at times very dark, and whenever there would come a cloud across the moon, he could see nothing. And then he used often to fall. Sometimes he was hurt, and sometimes he escaped, but he was obliged always to rest on the moment and to hurry on. Sometimes the moon would break out clearly, and then he would look behind him and see the little people following at his back, and he heard them speaking amongst themselves, talking and crying out and screaming like a flock of seagulls. and if he was to save his soul, he never understood as much as one word of what they were saying. He did not know how far he had walked when at last one of them cried out, "Stop here!" He stood, and they all gathered round him. "See those withered trees over there?" said the old boy to him again. "Temple Demas is among those trees. Just go in there by yourself, for we cannot follow you, or go with you. We must remain here. Go on boldly." Teague looked for him, and he saw a high wall that was in places half broken down, and an old grey church on the inside of the wall, and about a dozen withered old trees scattered here and there around it. There was neither leaf nor twig on any of them, but their bare, crooked branches were stretched out like the arms of an angry man when he threatens. He had no help for it, but was obliged to go forward. He was a couple of 100 yards from the church, but he walked on. He never looked behind him until he came to the gate of the churchyard. The old gate was thrown down, and he had no difficulty in entering. He turned then to see if any of the little people were following him, but there came a cloud over the moon. The night became so dark that he could see nothing. He went into the churchyard, and he walked up the old grassy pathway leading to the church. When he reached the door, he found it locked. The door was large and strong, and he didn't know what to do. At last he drew out his knife with difficulty, and stuck it in the wood, to try it if it were not rotten, but it was not. "Now," he said to himself, "no more to do. The door is shut, and I can't open it." Words were rightly shaped in his own mind. A voice in his ear said, "Search for the key on the door or on the wall." "Sir, who's that speaking to me?" he cried, turning round, but he saw no one. The voice said in his ear again, "Search for the key on the top of the door or on the wall." "Hey, well, come in, Dingle. Come in, Dingle. Isn't that long? I spent some time in Ireland. Okay, nice. "What's that?" said he, the sweat running from his forehead. "Who spoke to me?" "It is I, the corpse, that spoke to you," said the voice. "Can you talk?" said Teague. "Now and again," said the corpse. Teague searched for the key, and he found it on the top of the wall. He was too much frightened to say any more, but he opened the door wide and as quickly as he could, and he went in with the corpse on his back. It was as dark as pitch inside, and poor Teague began to shake and tremble. "Light the candle," said the corpse. "What's going good? Come on in, welcome on." Teague put his hand in his pocket, as well as he was able, and drew out a flint and steel. He struck a spark out of it, and lit a burnt rag he had in his pocket. He blew it until it made a flame, and he looked around him. The church was very ancient, and part of the wall was broken down. The windows were blown in or cracked, and the timber of the seats were rotten. There were 6 or 7 old iron candlesticks left there still, and in one of the candlesticks Teague found the stump of an old candle, and he lit it. He was still looking round him on the strange and horrid place in which he found himself, when the cold corpse whispered in his ear, "Bury me now. Bury me now. There is a spade and turn the ground." Teague looked round him, and he saw a spade lying beside the altar. He took it up, and he placed the blade under a flag that was in the middle of the aisle, and leaning all his weight in the handle of the spade, he raised it. When the first flag was raised, it was not hard to raise the others near it, and he moved 3 or 4 of them out of their places. The clay that was under them was soft and easy to dig, but he had thrown up more than 3 or 4 shovelfuls when he felt the iron touch something soft like flesh. He threw up 3 or 4 shovelfuls from around it, and then he saw that it was another body that was buried in the same place. "I'm afraid I'll never be allowed to bury the 2 bodies in the same hole," said Teague in his own mind. "You corpse there on my back," says he. "Will you be satisfied if I bury you down there?" But the corpse never answered him a word. "That's a good sign," said Teague to himself. "Maybe he's getting quiet." He thrust the spade down in the earth again. Perhaps he hit the flesh of the other body, for the dead man what was buried there stood up in the grave and shouted an awful shout, "Hoo hoo hoo, go go go, or you're a dead man." And then he fell back in the grave again. Teague said afterwards that of all the wonderful things he saw that night, that was the most awful to him. His hair stood upright on his head like the bristles of a pig. The cold sweat ran off his face, and then came a tremor over all his bones, until he thought that he must fall. But after a while he became bolder, when he saw that the second corpse remained lying quietly there, and he threw in the clay on it again, and he smoothed it overhead and laid down the flag carefully as he had seen before. "Can't be that it'll rise up anymore," said he. He went down the aisle a little further and drew near to the door, again raising the flags again, looking for another bed for the corpse on his back. He took up 3 or 4 flags and put them aside, and then he dug the clay. It was not long digging until he laid bare an old woman without a thread upon her but her shirt. She was more lively than the first corpse, for he had scarcely taken away the clay from her when she sat up and began to cry. "Oh, you Bodak, clown! Oh, you Bodak! Where has he been that he got no bed?" Poor Teague grew back. When he found that she was getting no answer, she closed her eyes gently, lost her vigor, and fell back quietly and slowly under the clay. Dig to her as he had done to the man. He threw the clay back on her and left the flags down overhead. He began digging again near the door. But before he had thrown up more than a couple of shovelfuls, he noticed the man's hand laid bare by the spade. "By my soul, I'll get no further then," said he to himself. "What use is it for me?" And he threw the clay in again on it, and settled the flags they had been before. He left the church then, and his heart was heavy enough, but he shut the door and locked it, and left the key where he had found it. He sat down on a tombstone that was near the door and began thinking. There was great doubt what he should do. He laid his face between his 2 hands and cried for grief and fatigue, since he was dead certain at this moment that he would never come home alive. He made another attempt to loosen the hands of the corpse that was squeezed round his neck, but they were as tight as if they were clamped. The more he tried to loosen them, the tighter they squeezed. He was going to sit down once more when the cold, horrid lips of the dead man said to him, "Carrick vad vic oris," and he remembered the command of the good people to bring the corpse with him to that place if he should be unable to bury it where he had been. He rose up and looked about him. "I don't know the way," he said. As soon as he had uttered the word, the corpse stretched out suddenly its left hand that had been tightening around his neck, and kept it pointing out, showing him the road he ought to follow. He went in the direction that the fingers were stretched and passed out to the churchyard. He found himself at an old ruddy stone road, and he stood still again, not knowing where to turn. The corpse stretched out its bony hand a second time, and pointed out to him another road. Not the road by which he had come when approaching the old church. Teague followed that road, and whenever came to a path or road meeting it, the corpse always stretched out his hand and pointed with its fingers, showing him the way he was to take. Many was the cross road he turned down, and many was the crooked boreen he walked, till he saw from him an old burying ground at last beside the road, but there was neither church nor chapel, nor any other building in it. The corpse squeezed him tightly, and he stood. Bury me in the burying ground," said that voice. Teague drew over towards the old burying place, and he was not more than about 20 yards from it, when raising his eyes he saw hundreds and hundreds of ghosts, men, women, and children, sitting on the top of the wall round about, or standing on the inside of it, or running backwards and forwards and pointing at him, while he could see their mouths opening and shutting as if they were speaking, though he heard no word, nor any sound amongst them at all. He was afraid to go forward, so he stood where he was, and the moment he stood all the ghosts became quiet and ceased moving. Then Teague understood what it was trying to keep him from going in. Yet they were. He walked a couple of yards forwards, and immediately the whole crowd rushed together towards the spot to where he was moving. They stood so thickly together that it seemed to him that he could neither break through them, even though he had a mind to try. But he had no mind to try it. He went back broken and dispirited. When he had gone a couple of 100 yards from the burying ground, he stood again, for he did not know which way he was to go. He had the voice of the corpse in his ear saying, "Tim Paul Ronan," and his skinny hand was stretched out again, pointing him out the road. As tired as he was, he had to walk, and the road was neither short nor even. The night was darker than ever, and it was difficult to make his way. Many was the toss he got, and many a bruise they left on his body. At last he saw Tim Paul Ronan from him in the distance. standing in the middle of burying ground. In the middle of the burying ground, he moved over towards it, and thought he was all right and safe when he saw no ghost nor anything else on the wall. He thought he would never be hindered now from leaving his load off him at last. He moved over the gate, but as soon as he was passing in, he tripped on the threshold. Before he could recover himself, something that he could not see seized him by the neck, by the hands and by the feet, and bruised him and shook him and choked him until he was nearly dead. At last he was lifted up and carried more than 100 yards from that place, then thrown down in an old dike with the corpse still clinging to him. He rose up, bruised and sore, but he feared to go near the place again, for had seen nothing the time he was thrown down and carried away. "You corpse up on my back," said he. "Go over again to the churchyard." But the corpse never answered him. "It's a sign you don't wish me to try again," said Teague. He's now in great doubt as to what he ought to do. The corpse spoke in his ear and said, "Imlog fada." "Oh, murder," said Teague. "Bring you there? If you keep me long walking like this, I tell you I'll fall under you." He went on, however, in the direction the corpse pointed out to him. He could not have told himself how long he had been going, when the dead man's behind suddenly squeezed him and said, "There." Teague looked from him, and he saw a little low wall that was so broken down in the places that it was no wall at all. It was in a great wide field in from the road, and only for 3 or 4 great stones at the corners that were more like rocks than stones. There was nothing to show that there was either graveyard or burying ground there. "Is this Imlog Fada? Shall I bury you here?" said Teague. "Yes," said the voice. "But I see no grave or gravestone, only these pile of stones," said Teague. The corpse did not answer, but stretched out its long fleshless hand to show Teague the direction in which he was to go. He went on accordingly, but he was greatly terrified, for he remembered what had happened to him at the last place. He went on with his heart in his mouth, as he himself afterwards. When he came to within 15 or 20 yards of the little low square wall, there broke out a flash of lightning, bright yellow and red with blue streaks in it, and went round about the wall in one course. It swept by as fast as the swallow in the clouds, and the longer Teague remained there, looking at, the faster it went, till at last it became like a bright ring of flame around the old graveyard, which no one could pass without being burnt by it. Teague never saw from the time he was born, and never saw afterwards, so wonderful or so splendid a sight as that was. Round went the flame, white and yellow and blue sparks leaping out from it as it went, though at first it had been no more than a thin narrow line. It increased slowly until it was at last a great broad band. It was continually getting broader and broader, and throwing out more brilliant sparks, till there was never a color on the ridge of the earth that was not seen in that fire. And lightning never shone, and flame never flamed that was so shining and so bright as that. Teague was amazed. He was half dead with fatigue, and he had no courage left to approach the wall. There fell a mist over his eyes, and there came a sore in his head. He was obliged to sit upon a great stone to recover himself. He could see nothing but the flight, and he could hear nothing but the whir of it as it shot round the paddock faster than a flash of lightning. As he sat there on stone, the voice whispered once more in his ear, "Kill Breedya." The dead man squeezed him so tightly that he cried out. He rose again, sick, tired, and trembling. He went forwards as he was directed. The wind was cold, and the road was bad. The load upon his back was heavy, and the night was dark, and he himself was nearly worn out, and if he had very much farther to go, he would have fallen dead under his burden. At last the corpse stretched out its hand and said to him, "Bury me there." "This is the last burying place," said Teague in his own mind. "Little grey men said I'd be allowed to bury him in some of them, so it must be this. It can't be but they'll let him in here." The first faint streak of the ring of day was appearing in the east. Clouds were beginning to catch fire, but it was darker than ever, for the moon was set and there were no stars. Make haste," said the corpse. Teague hurried forward as well as he could to the graveyard, which was a little place on a bare hill with only a few graves in it. He walked boldly in through the open gate, and nothing touched him, nor did he ever hear or see anything. He came to the middle of the ground, and then stood up and looked around him for a spade or shovel to make a grave. As he was turning round and searching, he suddenly perceived what startled him greatly. a newly dug grave right before him. He moved over to it, looked down, and there at the bottom he saw a black coffin. He clambered down in the hole and lifted the lid, and found that as he thought it would be, the coffin was empty. He had hardly mounted up on the hole, and was standing on the brink, when the corpse, which had clung to him for more than 8 hours, suddenly relaxed its hold on his neck, and loosened its shins from round his hips, and sank down with a plop into the open coffin. Teak fell down on his 2 knees at the brink of the grave, and gave thanks to God. He made no delay then, but pressed down the coffin lid in its place, and threw in clay over with his 2 hands, and when the grave was filled up, he stamped and leaped on it with his feet until it was firm and hard, and then he left the place. The sun was fast rising as he finished his work. The first thing he did was to return to the road and look out for a house to rest himself. He found an inn at last, and lay down upon a bed there and slept till night. Then he rose up and ate a little, and fell asleep again till morning. When he awoke in the morning, he hired a horse and rode home. He was more than 26 miles from home where he was, and he had come all that way with the dead body on his back in one night. All the people at his own home thought that he must have left the country, and rejoiced greatly when he saw him come back. Everyone began asking him where he had been, but he would not tell anyone except his father. He was a changed man from that day. He never drank too much, he never lost his money over cards, and especially he would not take the world and be out late by himself. And be out late by himself on a dark night. He was not a fortnight at home till he married Mary, the girl he had been in love with, and it's at their wedding the sport was, and it's he who was the happy man from that day forward. It's all I wish, that we may be as happy as he was. Oh, that was a long one. Okay. This one is called Paddy Corcoran's Wife by William Carleton. Paddy Corcoran's wife was for several years after...
I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC.
Paddy Corcoran's wife, not Chris Hansen's. Okay. Wrong guy. Paddy Corcoran's wife was for several years afflicted with a kind of complaint which nobody could properly understand. She was sick and she was not sick. She was well and she was not well. She was as ladies wish to be who love their lords, and she was not as such ladies wish to be. In fact, nobody could tell what the matter with her was. She had a gnawing at the heart which came heavily upon her husband. With the help of God, a keener appetite, the same gnawing amounted to, could not be met with of a summer's day. Oh yeah, I have a beverage I've been sipping on. The poor woman was delicate beyond belief, and had no appetite at all, so she hadn't, barring a little relish for a mutton chop, or a steak, or a bit of meat. Anyway, for sure, God help her. She hadn't the least inclination for the dara pretty, or the drop of sour buttermilk along with it. Especially as she was so poorly, indeed, for a woman in her condition, for sick as she was, poor Paddy always was made to believe in her that condition. But God's will be done, she didn't care. A pretty and a grain of salt was a welcome to her, glory be to his name, as the best roast and boil that ever was dressed. Why not? There was one comfort. She wouldn't be long with him, long troubling him. It mattered little what she got, but sure she knew herself that from the gnawing at her heart, she could never do without the little bit of mate now and then. And sure, if her own husband begrudged it to her, who else had she a better right to expect it from? Well, as we have said, she lay a bedridden invalid for long enough, trying doctors and quacks of all sorts. sexes and sizes, and all without a farthing's benefit, until the long run, poor Paddy was nearly brought to the last pass in striving to keep her in the bit o' mate. The 7th year was now on the point of closing, when one harvest day, as she lay bemoaning her hard condition on her bed beyond the kitchen fire, a little weeshy woman, dressed in a neat red cloak, comes in and sitting down by the hearth says, "Well, Kitty Corinne, you've had a long lay of it there on the broad o' your back for 7 years, and you're just as far from being cured as ever." "Mavro aye," said the other. "Troth, that's what I was with this minute thinking of. A sorrowful thought it's to me." "It's your own fault then," said the little woman. "Deed, for that matter, it's your fault that ever you wore there at all." "How is that?" said Kitty. "Sure, I wouldn't be here if I could help it. Do you think it's a comfort or a pleasure to me to be sick and bedridden?" "No," said the other, "I do not. But I'll tell you the truth. For the last 7 years you've been annoying us. I'm one of the good people, and as I have a regard for you, I've come to let you know the reason you've been sick as long as you are. For all the time you've been ill, if you'll take the trouble to remember, your children threw out your dirty water after dusk and before sunrise at the very time we were passing your door, which we pass twice a day. Now, if you avoid this, if you throw it out in a different place, in a different time, the complaint will have left you. So will the gnawing at the heart, and you'll be as well as ever you were. If you don't follow this advice, remains as you are, and all art man can't cure you." She then bade her goodbye and disappeared. Kitty, who was glad to be cured on such easy terms, immediately complied with the injunction of the fairy. The consequence was that the next day she found herself in as good health as ever she enjoyed during her life. Cuisine Lu, translated from the Irish by J.J. Callanan. This song is supposed to have been sung by a young bride who was forcibly detained in one of those forts which are so common in Ireland, and to which the good people are very fond of resorting. Under pretense of hushing her child to rest, she retired to the outside margin of the fort, and addressed the burden of her song to a young woman who she saw at short distance, and whom she requested to inform her husband of her condition, and to desire him to bring the steel knife to dissolve the enchantment. "Sleep, my child, for the rustling trees, stirred by the breath of summer breeze, and fairy songs of sweetest note around us gently float. Sleep, for the weeping flowers have shed their fragrant tears upon thy head. The voice of love hath soothed thy rest, and thy pillow is a mother's breast. Sleep, my child. Weary hath passed the time forlorn, since to your mansion I was born. Though bright the feast of its airy halls, and the voice of mirth resounds from its walls. Sleep, my child. Full many a maid and blooming bride within that splendid dome abide, and many a hoar and shrivelled sage, and many a matron bowed with age. Sleep, my child. O thou who was dearest this song of fear, to the mourner's home these tidings bear. Bid him bring the knife of the magic blade, at whose lightning flash the charm will fade. Sleep, my child. Haste, for tomorrow's sun will see the hateful spell renewed for me, nor can I from that home depart, till life shall leave my withering heart. Sleep, my child. Sleep, my child, for the rustling trees, stirred by the breath of summer breeze, and fairy songs of sweetest note around us gently float. This one's called The White Trout, A Legend of Kong, by S. Lover. There was once upon a time long ago a beautiful lady that lived in a castle upon the Lake Bant, and they said she was promised to a king's son, and they were to be married. when all of a sudden he was murdered. The Crather, Lord help us, and thrown into the lake above. And so, of course, he couldn't keep his promise to the fair lady, and more's the pity. When the story goes that she went out in her mind because of losing the king's son, for she was tender-hearted, God help her, like the rest of us, and pined away after him, until at last no one about seen her, good or bad, and the story went that the fairies took her away. Well, sir, in course of time, the white throat, God bless it, was seen in the ambient, and sure the people didn't know what to think of the Crather, seeing as how a white trout was never heard of before, nor since. On years upon years the trout was there, just where ye seen it, this blessed minute, longer nor I can tell. I troth and bain't the memory of the oldest in the village. At last the people began to think it must be a fairy, for what else could it be? And no hurt nor harm was ever put on the white trout, until some wicked sinners of soldiers came to these parts and laughed at all the people, and jibed and jeered them for thinking all the likes, and one of them in particular, bad luck to him, God forgive me for saying it, swore he'd catch the trout and ate it for his dinner, the blackguard. Well, then what would you think of the villainy of the soldier? Sure enough, he catched the trout, and away with him home, and he puts it in a frying pan, and into it he pitches the purty little thing. The trout squealed all as one as a Christian brother, and my dear, you'd think the soldier split his sides laughing, for he was a hardened villain. And when he thought one side was done, he turns it over to fry the other. And what would you think? But the devil tasted the burn was on it all. So the soldier thought it was a square trout that could not be grilled. But, says he, give it another turn by and by, little thinking it what was in store for him, the heathen. Well, when he thought that the side was done, he turns it again, and lo and behold, the devil a little taste more done with that side was nor the other. Bad lucks to me, said the soldier, but that beats the world, said he. But I'll fry you again, my darling, said he, as cunning as you think yourself. So at that, he turns it over and over, but not a sign that the fire was on the purty trout. Well, says the desperate villain, for sure, sir, only he was a desperate villain entirely. He might know he was doing a wrong thing, seeing that all his endeavors was no good. Says he, my jolly little trout, you're fried enough, although you don't seem over well dressed, but you may be better than you look, like a singed cat, and a tidbit after all, says he. With that, he ups with his knife and fork to taste a piece of the trout. My jewel, the minute he puts his knife to the fish, there was a murdering screech that you'd think the life lay have you if you heard it, and away jumped the trout out of the frying pan into the middle of the floor, the spot where it fell up. There was a lovely lady, the beautifulest creature that eyes ever seen, that Crather ever seen, dressed in white, and a band of gold in her hair, and a stream of blood running down her arm. Look where you cut me, you villain, says she. She held out her arm to him. Dear, he thought the sight of his eyes. Couldn't you leave me cool and comfortable in the river where you snared me and not disturb me in my duties, she. Well, he trembled like a dog in a wet sack. Last he stammered out something and begged for his life, and asked her ladyship's pardon, and said he didn't know she was on duty, or he was too good a soldier to know whether or not to meddle with her. I was on duty then, says the lady, watching for my true love that is coming by water to me, says she. If he comes while I'm away, that I miss him, I'll turn you into a chicken, and I'll hunt you down and drown and down forevermore, while grass grows or water runs. Soldier thought the life it leave him, and thought it's been turned into a pigeon and begged for mercy. At that, says the lady, renounce your evil courses, she, you villain, or you'll repent it soon, or you'll repent it too late. Be a good man for the father, and go to your duty, regular, and now, says she, take me back and put me in the river again where you found me. My lady, says the soldier, could I have the heart to drown a beautiful lady like you? Or he could say another word, the lady was vanished, and there he saw the little trout on the ground. Well, he put it on a clean plate. Away he runs for bare life, for fear her lover would come while she was away, and run, even until he came to the cave again and threw the trout into the river. The minute he did, the water was as red as blood for a little while, but reason of the cut, I suppose, until the thrame washed the stain away. This day, there's a little red mark on the trout's side where it was cut. Well, sir, from that day out, the soldier was an altered man and reformed his ways, went to his duty regular and fasted 3 times a week, though it was never a fish he took on the fasting days. For after the fright he got, fish never rest on his stomach, safe in your presence. But anyhow, he was an altered man, as I said before. Of course, of time he left the army and turned hermit at last, and they say he used to pray evermore for the soul of the white trout. These trout stories are common all over Ireland. Many holy wells are haunted by such blessed trout. There was a trout in a well on the border of Lough Gill, and that some paganish person put once on the gridiron. It carries the marks to this day. Long ago, the saint who sanctified the well put that trout there. Nowadays, it is only visible to the pious who have done due penance. I did my best that one. It was printed phonetically, so I did my best. All right. The Fairy Thorn, an Ulster Ballad by Sir Samuel Ferguson. Get up, our Anna dear, from the weary spinning wheel, for your father's on the hill and your mother is asleep. Come up above the crags, and we'll dance a Highland reel around the Fairy Thorn on the steep. And Anna Grace's door, 'twas thus the maidens cried, 3 merry maidens fair and kirtles of the green. And Anna laid the rock and the weary wheel aside, the fairest of the 4, I ween. They're glancing through the glimmer of the quiet eve, away in milky wavings of neck and ankle bare. The heavy sliding stream and its sleepy song they leave, and the crags in the ghostly air. And linking hand in hand and singing as they go, the maids along the hillside have their fearless way, till they come to where the rowan trees in lonely beauty grow, beside the fairy hawthorn tree, or beside the fairy hawthorn grey. The hawthorn stands between the ashes tall and slim, like matron with her twin granddaughters at her knee. The rowan berries cluster o'er her low head, grey and dim, and ruddy kisses sweet to see. The merry maidens 4 have ranged them in a row, between each lovely couple a stately rowan stem, and away in mazes wavy, like skimming birds they go. Never caroled bird like them, but solemn is the silence of the silvery haze that drinks away their voices in echoless repose, and dreamily the evening has stilled the haunted breeze, and dreamier the gloaming grows, and singing one by one like lark notes from the sky. And the falcon's shadow saileth across the open shaw, or hushed the maidens' voices, as cowering down they lie in the flutter of their sudden awe. For from the air above and the grassy ground beneath, and from the mountain ashes and the old white thorn between, a power of faint enchantment doth bring their beings breathe, and they sink down together on the green. They sink together silent, and stealing side by side, they fling their lovely arms o'er their drooping necks so flare, then vainly strive against their naked arms to hide, for their shrinking necks again are bare, thus clasped and prostrate all, with their heads together bowed. Such are their bosoms beating, the only human sound. They hear the silky footsteps of the silent fairy crowd, like a river in the air, gliding round. No scream can any raise, no prayer can any say, but wild, wild the terror of the speechless 3, for they feel fair Anna Grace drawn silently away, by whom they dare not look to see. They feel their tresses twine with her parting locks of gold, and the curls elastic falling as her head withdraws. They feel her sliding arms from their tranced arms unfold, but they may not look to see the cause, for heavy on their senses the faint enchantment lies. Through all the night of anguish and perilous amaze, and neither fear nor wonder can up their quivering eyes, or their limbs from the cold ground arise, till out of night the earth has rolled her dewy side, with every haunted mountain and steaming vale below, when as the mist dissolves in the yellow morning tide, the maiden's trance dissolveth so, then fly the ghastly three as swiftly as they may, and tell their tale of sorrow to anxious friends in vain. They pined away and died within the year and day, and ne'er was Anna Grace seen again. All right, this one's The Legend of Knockcrafton by T. Crofton Crocker. There was once a poor man who lived in the fertile glen of Ireland, at the foot of the gloomy Galtee Mountains, and he had a great hump on his back. He looked just as if his body had been rolled up and placed upon his shoulders, and his head was pressed down with the weight so much that his chin, when he was sitting, used to rest upon his knees for support. The country people were rather shy of meeting him in a lonely place, for though, poor creature, he was as harmless and as inoffensive as a newborn infant, yet his deformity was so great that he scarcely appeared to be a human creature. Then some ill-minded persons had set strange stories about him afloat. He was said to have great knowledge of herbs and charms, but certain it was that he had a mighty skillful hand in plaiting straws and rushes into hats and baskets, which was the way he made his livelihood. Lusmore, for that was the nickname put upon him by reason of his always wearing a sprig of the fairy cap, or Lusmore, the foxglove in his little straw hat, would ever get a higher penny for his plaited work than anyone else, and perhaps that was the reason why someone, out of envy, had circulated the strange stories about him. But that as it may, it happened that he was returning one evening from the pretty town of Cahir up towards Kappa, and as a little Lusmore walked very slowly on account of the great hump upon his back, it was quite dark when he came to the old moat of Knockcrafton, which stood on the right-hand side of his road. Tired and weary was he, and nowadays comfortable in his own mind at thinking how much farther he had to travel, and that he should be walking all the night. So he sat down under the moat to rest himself, began looking mournfully enough upon the moon, which, rising in clouded majesty, at length the parent queen unveiled her peerless light, and o'er the dark her silver mantle threw. Presently there rose a wild strain of unearthly melody upon the ear of little Lusmore. He listened, and he thought that he had never heard such ravishing music before. It was like the sound of many voices, each mingling and blending with the other so strangely that they seemed to be one, though all singing different strains, and the words of the song were these: Daluan de mort, Daluan de mort, Daluan de mort. There will be a moment's pause, and then the round of melody went on again. Lusmore listened attentively, scarcely drawing his breath lest he might lose the slightest note. He now plainly perceived that the singing was within the moat. Though at first it had charmed him so much, he began to get tired of hearing the same round sung over and over so often without any change. So availing himself of the pause when Daluan de Mort had been sung 3 times, he took up the tune and raised it with the words August da Dardine, and then went on singing with the voices inside at the moat, Daluan de Mort, finishing the melody when the pause again came with August da Dardine. The fairies within Knockcrafton, for the song was a fairy melody, when they heard this addition to the tune, were so much delighted that, with instant resolve, it was determined to bring the mortal among them, whose musical skill so far exceeded theirs, and little Lusmore was conveyed in their company with the eddying speed of a whirlwind. Glorious to behold was the sight that burst upon him as it came down through the moat, twirling round and round with the lightness of a straw, to the sweetest music that kept time to his motion. The greatest honor was paid him, for he was put above all the musicians, and he had servants tending upon him, and everything to his heart's content, a hearty welcome to all. If, in short, he was made as much of as if he had been the first man in the land. Presently, Lesmer saw a great consultation going forward among the fairies, and notwithstanding all their civility, he felt very much frightened, till one stepping out from the rest came up to him and said, Lesmore, Lesmore, thou'rt not nor deplore, for the hump which you bore on your back is no more. Look down on the floor and view it, Lesmore. These words were said. Poor little Lesmore felt himself so light and happy, that he thought he could have bounded one jump of the moon, like the cow in the history of the cat and the fiddle. And he saw with inexpressible pleasure his hump tumble down upon the ground from his shoulders. He then tried to lift up his head, and he did so with becoming caution, fearing that he might knock it against the ceiling of the grand hall where he was. He looked round and round again with the greatest wonder and delight upon everything, which appeared more and more beautiful, and overpowered at beholding such a resplendent scene. His head grew dizzy, and his eyesight became dim. At last he fell into a sound sleep, and when he awoke he found that it was daylight, the sun shining brightly and the birds singing sweetly, and that he was lying just at the foot of the moat of Knockgrafton, the cows and sheep grazing peacefully round about him. The first thing Lesmore did after saying his prayers was to put his hand behind to feel for his lump, but no sign of one was there on his back, and he looked at himself with great pride, for he had now become a well-shaped, dapper little fellow, and more than that, found himself in a full suit of new clothes, which he concluded the fairies had made for him. Towards Capet he went, stepping out as lightly and springing up at every step, as if he had been all his life a dancing master. That a creature who knew Lesmore knew him without his hump, and he had a great work to persuade everyone that he was the same man. And truth he was not, so far as the outward appearance went. Of course it was not long before the story of Lesmore's hump got about. Great wonder was made of it throughout the country for miles round. It was the talk of everyone, high and low. One morning, as Lesmore was sitting content enough at his cabin door, up came an old woman to him, and asked if he could direct her to Kappa. I need give you no directions, my good woman, said Lesmore, for this is Kappa, and whom may you want here? I have come, said the woman, out of Decius country in the county of Watford, looking for one Lesmore, who I have heard tell had his hump taken off by the fairies, for there is a son of a gossip of mine who has got a hump on him, will be his death. Maybe if he could use the same charm as Lesmore, the hump may be taken off. Now I have told you the reason I have coming this far, 'tis to find out this charm if I can. Lesmore, who was ever a good-natured little fellow, told the woman all the particulars, how he had raised the tune for the fairies at Knockgrafton, how his hump had been removed from his shoulders, and how he had got a new suit of clothes into the bargain. The woman thanked him very much, and then went away quite happy and easy in her mind. But she came back to her gossip's house in the country of Waterford. She told her everything that Lesmore had said, and put the little humpbacked man, who was a peevish and cunning creature from his birth, upon a car, and took him another way across the country. It was a long journey, but they did not care for that. So the hump was taken from off him, and they brought him just at nightfall and left him under the old moat of Knockgrafton. Jack Madden, for that was the humpy man's name, had not been sitting there long when he heard the tune going on within the moat much sweeter than before, for the fairies were singing it the way Lesmore had settled their music for them. The song was going on, de Luan de Mort, de Luan de Mort, de Luan de Mort, Auguste de Dardine. Without ever stopping, Jack Madden was in a great hurry to get rid of his hump, never thought of waiting until the fairies had done, or watching for a fit of opportunity to raise the tune higher again than Lesmore had. So having heard them sing it over 7 times without stopping, out he bawls, never minding the time or the humor of the tune, or how he could bring his words in properly, Augusta Gardina, Augusta Hina, thinking that if one day was good, 2 were better, and that if Lesmore had one new suit of clothes given him, he should have 2. No sooner had the words passed his lips than he was taken up and whisked into the moat with prodigious force. And the fairies came crowding round about him with great anger, screeching and screaming and roaring out, "Who spoiled our tune? Who spoiled our tune?" And one stepped up to him above all the rest and said, Jack Madden, your words came so bad in the tune we felt glad in. This castle you are had in, that your life we may sadden. Here's 2 humps for Jack Madden." And 20 of the strongest fairies brought Lismore's hump and put it down upon poor Jack's back, over his own, where it became fixed as firmly as if it was nailed on with 20 penny nails, by the best carpenter that ever drove one. Out of their castle they kicked him, and in the morning, when Jack Madden's mother and her gossip came to look after the little man, they found him half dead, lying at the foot of the moat, with the other hump upon his back. Well, to be sure, how they did look at each other. They were afraid to say anything, lest a hump might be put upon their own shoulder. Home they brought the unlucky Jack Madden with them, as downcast in their hearts and in their looks as ever 2 gossips were, and went through the weight of his other hump. And the long journey he died soon after, leaving, they say, his heavy curse to any one who would go to listen to fairy tunes again. This one's called A Donegal Fairy by Letitia McClintock. Aye, it's a bad thing to displeasure the gentry, sure enough. They can be unfriendly if they're angered, and they can be very best to guide neighbors if be the very best of good neighbors if they are treated kindly. My mother's sister was her alone at the house one day with a big pot of water boiling on the fire. And all the wee folk fell down the chimney and slipped with his leg in the hot water. He let out a terrible squeal out of him, and in a minute the house was full of wee creatures pulling him out of the pot and carrying him across the floor. "Did she scald you?" my aunt heard them saying to him. Nah, it was myself, scalded myself," putted the wee fellow. A wheel, says they. "If it was your Ansel scalded yourself, we'll say nothing, but if she had scalded you, we'd have made her pay." This brings us to another section. The Trooping Fairies. Changelings. Sometimes the fairies fancy mortals and carry them away into their own country, leaving instead some sickly fairy child, or a log of wood so bewitched that it seems to be immortal, pining away and dying, and being buried. Most commonly they steal children. If you overlook a child, that is, look on it with envy, the fairies have it in their power. Many things can be done to find out if a child is a changeling, but there is one infallible thing. Lay it on the fire with this formula: burn, 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 if of the devil burn, but if of God and the saints be safe from harm. Given by Lady Wilde. Then if it be a changeling, it will rush up the chimney with a cry. For according to Giraldus Cambrensis, fire is the greatest of enemies to every sort of phantom, insomuch that those who have seen apparitions fall into a swoon as soon as they are sensible of the brightness of fire. Sometimes the creature is got rid of in a more gentle way. 'Tis on record that once when a mother was leaning over a wizened changeling, the latch lifted, and a fairy came in, carrying home again the wholesome stolen baby. It was the other, she said, who stole it. As for her, she wanted her own child. Those who are carried away are happy according to some accounts, having plenty of good living and music and mirth. Others say, however, that they were continually longing for their earthly friends. Lady Wilde gives a gloomy tradition that there are 2 kinds of fairies, one kind merry and gentle, the other evil, and sacrificing every year a life to Satan, for which purpose they steal mortals. No other Irish writer gives this tradition. If such fairies there be, they must be among the solitary spirits, pukas, furdarigs, and the like. The Brewery of Eggshells by T. Crofton Croker. Mrs. Sullivan fancied that her youngest child had been exchanged by fairies' theft, and certainly appearances warranted such a conclusion, for in one night our wealthy blue-eyed boy had become shriveled up in almost nothing, and never ceased squalling and crying. This naturally made poor Mrs. Sullivan very unhappy, and all the neighbors, by way of comforting her, said that her own child was beyond any kind of doubt with the good people, and that one of themselves was put in his place. Mrs. Sullivan, of course, could not disbelieve what everyone told her, but she did not wish to hurt the thing, for although its face was so withered, its body wasted away to a mere skeleton, it had still a strong resemblance to her own boy. She therefore could not find it in her heart to roast it alive on the griddle, or to burn off its nose with the red-hot tongs, or to throw it out in the snow on the roadside. Notwithstanding these and several like proceedings were strongly recommended to her for the recovery of her child. One day, who should Mrs. Sullivan meet but a cunning woman, well known about the country by the name of Ellen Lay, or Grey Ellen. She had the gift, however she got it, of telling where the dead were, and what was good for the rest of their souls, and could charm away warts and wens, and do a great many wonderful things of the same nature. "You're in grief this morning, Mrs. Sullivan," were the first words of Ellen Leah to her. "You may say that, Ellen," said Mrs. Sullivan. "Good cause I have to be in grief, for there was my own fine child whipped off from me out of his cradle, without as much as a by your leave or ask your pardon, an ugly donny bit of shriveled up fairy put in his place. No wonder, then, that you see me in grief, Ellen." "Small blame to you, Mrs. Sullivan," said Ellen Lay, "but are you sure 'tis a fairy?" "Sure," echoed Miss Sullivan. "Sure enough I am to my own sorrow, and can I doubt my own two eyes? Every mother's soul must feel for me." "Will you take an old woman's advice?" said Ellen Lay, fixing her wild and mysterious gaze upon the unhappy mother, and after a pause she added, "But maybe you'll call it foolish." "Can you get me back my child, my own child, Ellen?" said Mrs. Sullivan with great energy. "If you do as I bid you," returned Ellen Lay, "you'll know." Mrs. Sullivan was silent in expectation, and Ellen continued, "Put down the big pot, full of water, on the fire and make it boil like mad. Then get a dozen new laid eggs, break them and keep the shells, but throw away the rest. When that is done, put the shells in the pot to boiling water. You will soon know whether it's your own boy or a fairy. If you find that it is a fairy in the cradle, take the red-hot poker and cram it down his ugly throat. You will not have much trouble with him after that, I promise you." Home went Mrs. Sullivan and did as Ellen Lay desired. She put the pot on the fire, and plenty of turf under it, and set the water boiling at such a rate that if ever water was red-hot, which it surely was. The child was lying, for a wonder, quite easy and quiet in the cradle, every now and then cocking his eye, that would twinkle as keen as a star in a frosty night, over at the great fire, and the big pot upon it, and looked on with great attention at Mrs. Sullivan breaking the eggs and putting down the shells to boil. At last, yes, with the voice of a very old man, "What are you doing, Mummy?" Mrs. Sullivan's heart, as she said herself, was up in her mouth, ready to choke her at hearing the child speak. But she contrived to put the poker in the fire and to answer without making any wonder at the words. "I'm brewing a Vic, my son." "What are you brewing, Mummy?" said the little imp, whose supernatural gift of speech now proved beyond question that he was a fairy substitute. "I wish the poker was red," thought Miss Sullivan, but it was a large one, and took a long time heating. So she determined to keep it and talk until the poker was in a proper state to thrust down his throat, and therefore repeated the question. "Is it what I'm brewing a Vic?" said she. "You want to know?" "Yes, Mummy, what are you brewing?" returned the fairy. "Eggshells of Vic," said Miss Sullivan. "Oh!" shrieked the imp, sitting up in the cradle and clapping his hands together. "I'm 1,500 years in the world, and I've never seen a brewery of eggshells before." The poker was by this time quite red. Mrs. Sullivan, seizing it, ran fiercely towards the cradle, but somehow or another her foot slipped, and she fell flat on the floor, and the poker flew out of her hand to the other end of the house. However, she got up without much loss of time and went to the cradle, intending to pitch the wicked thing that was it into the pot of boiling water. When there she saw her own child in a sweet sleep, one of his soft round arms rested upon the pillow. His features were as placid as if their repose had never been disturbed, save the rosy mouth, which moved with a gentle and regular breathing. This is called The Fairy Nurse by Edward Walsh. Sweet babe, a golden cradle holds thee, and soft the snow-white fleece enfolds thee. In airy bower I'll watch thy sleeping, where the branchy trees to the breeze are sweeping. Shohin Sho Lulul. When mothers languish broken-hearted, when young wives are from husbands parted, little think the keeners lonely, they weep sometime, worn fairly only. Shohin Sho Lul. Within our magic halls of brightness trips many a foot of snowy whiteness. Stolen maidens, queens of fairy, and kings and chiefs a sloshieri. Shush Ian so Olo. Rest thee, babe, I love thee dearly, and as thy mortal mother nearly. Ours is the swiftest steed and proudest that moves where the tramp of the host is loudest. Shahin Sho Olo. Rest thee, babe, for soon thy slumber shall flee at the magic Kolshi's numbers. In airy bower I'll watch thy sleeping, where branchy trees to the breeze are sweeping. Shushin Shulolo. Hello, Camp. Welcome on in. Okay, we'll do this one next story. We'll wrap it up for the evening. Jamie Friel and the Young Lady. A Donegal Tale. Miss Letitia McClintock. Or by Miss Letitia McClintock. Down in Fennet in times gone by lived Jamie Friel and his mother. Jamie was the widow's sole support. His strong arm worked for her entirely, and as each Saturday night came round, he poured his wages into her lap, thanking her dutifully for the halfpence which she returned him for tobacco. He was extolled by his neighbours as the best son ever known or heard of. But he had neighbours of whose opinion he was ignorant, neighbours who lived pretty close to him, whom he had never seen, who are indeed rarely seen by mortals, except on May Eves and Halloweens. An old ruined castle about a quarter of a mile from his cabin was said to be the abode of the wee folk. Every Halloween was the ancient windows lighted up, and passers-by saw little figures flitting to and fro inside the building, while they heard the music of pipes and flutes. It was well known that fairy revels took place, but nobody had the courage to intrude on them. Jamie had often watched the little figures from a distance and listened to the charming music, wondering what the inside of the castle was like. But one Halloween he got up and took his cap, saying to his mother, "I'm away to the castle to seek my fortune." "What?" cried she. "Would you venture out? Would you venture there? That's the poor widow's one son. It'd be sae venturous and foolish, Jimmy. They'll kill you, and then what'll come of me? Never fear, mother. No harm will happen me. But mine go." He set out, and as he crossed the potato field, came in sight of the castle. His windows were ablaze with light, then seemed to turn the russet leaves, still clinging to the crab-tea branches, into gold. Halting in the grove at one side of the ruin, he listened to the elfin revelry, and the laughter and singing made him all the more determined to proceed. Numbers of little people, the largest about the size of a child of 5 years old, were dancing to the music of flutes and fiddles, while others drank and feasted. "Welcome, Jamie Friel! Welcome, welcome, Jamie!" cried the company. Perceiving their visitor, the word welcome was caught up and repeated by every voice in the castle. Time flew, and Jamie was enjoying himself very much, when his host said, "We're going to ride to Dublin night to steal a young lady. Will you come too, Jamie Friel?" Hold on 1 second. Aye, that will I, cried the rash youth, thirsting for adventure. A troop of horses stood at the door. Jamie mounted, and his steed rose with him into the air. He was presently flying over his mother's cottage, surrounded by the elfin troop. And on they went, over bald mountains, over little hills, over the deep Lough Swilly, over towns and cottages, when people were burning nuts and eating apples and keeping merry Halloween. It seemed to Jamie that they flew all around Ireland before they got to Dublin. "This is Derry," said the fairies, flying over the cathedral spire. And what was said by one voice was repeated by all the rest, till 50 little voices were all crying out, "Derry, Derry, Derry!" In like manner was Jamie informed as they passed over each town on the route. At length he heard the silvery voices cry, "Dublin, Dublin!" Snow means dwelling that was to be honoured by the fairy visit, but one of the finest houses in Stephen's Green. The troop just mounted near a window, and Jamie saw a beautiful face on a pillow in a splendid bed. He saw the young lady lifted and carried away, while the stick which was dropped in her place in the bed took her exact form. The lady was placed before one rider and carried a short way, then given another, and the names of the towns were cried out as before. They were approaching home. Jamie heard, "Rathmullen, Milford, Tamney," and then he knew they were near his own house. "Fall had your turn at carrying the young lady," said he. "Why wouldn't I get her for a wee piece?" "Aye, Jamie," replied they pleasantly. Take your turn at carrying her, to be sure." Holding his prize very tightly, he dropped down near his mother's door. Jamie Friel, is that the way you treat us?" cried they. They too dropped down near the door. Jamie held fast, though he knew not what he was doing, for the little folk turned the lady into all sorts of strange shapes. At one moment she was a black dog, barking and trying to bite. At another a glowing bar of iron, which yet had no heat. Then again a sack of wool. But still Jamie held her, and the baffled elves were turning away, when a tiny woman, smallest of the party, exclaimed, "Jamie Friel has her away for us, but he shall have no good her, for I'll make her deaf and dumb." And she threw something over the young girl. While they rode off disappointed, Jamie lifted the latch and went in. "Jamie, man," cried his mother, "you've been away all night. What have they done on you?" "Nothing bad, mother. I had the very best of good luck. There's a beautiful young lady I have brought you for company." "Bless us and save us," exclaimed the mother. For some minutes she was so astonished that she could not think of anything to say. Jamie told his story of the night's adventure by saying, "Surely you wouldn't allow me to let a gang with them be lost forever." "But a lady, Jamie, can a lady eat poor diet, living where poor way? Ask that you foolish fellow. Real mother, sure it's better for her to be here and not over yonder," pointing in the direction of the castle. Meanwhile, the deaf and dumb girl shivered in her light clothing, stepped closer to the humble turf fire. "Poor creature, she's fair and handsome. No wonder they set their hearts on her," said the old woman, gazing at her guest with pity and admiration. "Come on, dress her first. In the name of fortune have I fit for the likes of her to wear." She went to her presses in the room, and took her Sunday gown out of brown drugget. She then opened a drawer and drew forth a pair of white stockings, a long snowy garment of fine linen, and a cap, her dead dress, as she called it. These articles of attire had long been ready for a certain ceremony in which they filled the chief part, and only saw the light occasionally when they were hung out to wear, but she was willing to give even these to the fair trembling visitor, who was turning in dumb sorrow and wonder from her to Jamie, and from Jamie back to her. Hold on a moment, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Was hearing a sound, was hearing a chewing sound. I don't think that was a fairy. I think that was a rodent of some sort. I was trying to investigate. It's gone now. Oh, we're doing, oh yeah, story of Jamie Field. Poor girl suffered herself to be dressed and sat down on a creepy in the chimney corner and buried her face in her hands. What do we do to keep up a young lady like you? Cried the old one. Work for you both, mother, replied the son. How could a lady live and wear poor diet, she repeated. I'll work for her, was all Jamie's answer. He kept his word. The young lady was very sad for a long time, and tears stole down her cheeks many an evening. The old woman spun by the fire, and Jamie made salmon nets, an accomplishment late acquired by him, in hopes of adding to the comfort of his guest. But she was always gentle and tried to smile when she perceived him looking at her, and by degrees she adapted more to her ways and mode of life. It was not very long before she began to feed the pigs mashed potatoes and meal for the fowls, and knit blue worsted socks. So a year passed, and Halloween came round again. Mother, said Jamie, taking down his cap, off to the old castle to seek my fortune. Are you mad, Jamie? Cried his mother in terror. They'll kill you this time for what you've done on them last year. Jamie made a light of her fears and went his way. As he reached the Crabtree Grove, he saw bright lights in the castle windows as before. Heard loud talking creeping under the window. He heard the wee folk say, That was a poor trick Jamie Field played us this night last year, when he stole the nice young lady from us. Aye, said the tiny one, and I punished him for it. There she sits, a dumb image by his hearth. But he does not know the 3 drops out this glass I hold in my hand would get her hearing and her speeches back again. Jamie's heart beat fast as he entered the hall. Again he was welcomed by a chorus of welcomes from the company. Here comes Jamie Friel, welcome, welcome, Jamie. Soon as the tumult subsided, Owen said, Be to drink our health, Jamie, out this glass in my hand. Snatched the glass from her and darted to the door. He never knew how he reached his cabin, but he arrived there breathless and sank on a stove by the fire. Killed surely this time, my poor boy, said his mother. Indeed, better luck than ever this time. Gave the lady 3 drops of the liquid that still remained at the bottom of the glass, notwithstanding his mad race over the potato field. The lady began to speak, and her first words were words of thanks to Jamie. 3 inmates at the cabin had so much to say to one another that long after cockcrow, where the music had quite ceased, they were talking round the fire. Jamie, said the lady, be pleased to get me paper and pen and ink, that I may write to my father and tell him what has become of me. She wrote, but weeks passed, and she received no answer. Again and again she wrote, and still no answer. At length she said, You must come with me to Dublin, Jamie, to find my father. I have no money to hire a car for you, he replied. And how can you travel to Dublin on your foot? She implored him so much that he consented to set out with her and walk all the way from Fanet to Dublin. It was not easy. It's not as easy as the ferry journey, but at last they rang the bell at the door of the house in Stephen's Green. Tell my father that this daughter is here, said she to the servant to open the door. The gentleman that lives here has no daughter, my girl. He had one, but she died but nor a year ago. Do you not know me, Sullivan? Girl, I do not. See the gentleman. I only ask to see him. That's not much to ask. We'll see what can be done. A few moments, the lady's father came to the door. Dear father, said she. Don't you know me? How dare you call me father? Cried the old angrily. An impostor, I have no daughter. Look in my face, father, and surely you'll remember me. My daughter is dead and buried. She died a long, long time ago. The old man's voice changed from anger to sorrow. You can go, he concluded. Stop, dear father. Look at this ring on my finger. Look at your name and mine engraved on it. Certainly is my daughter's ring, but I do not know how you came by it. I fear no honest way. Call my mother. She will be sure to know me, said the poor girl, who by this time was crying bitterly. My poor wife is beginning to forget her sorrow. She seldom speaks of her daughter now. Why should I renew her grief by reminding her of her loss? But the young lady persevered. At last the mother was sent for. Mother, she began when the old lady came to the door. Don't you know your daughter? No daughter. My daughter died. It was buried a long, long time ago. Look in my face and surely you'll know me. The old lady shook her head. You've forgotten me. Look at this mole on my neck. Surely, mother, you know me now. Yes, the mother. She had a mole on her neck like that. But then I saw in her coffin and the lid shut down upon her. Came Jamie's turn to speak, and gave the history of the fairy journey, of the theft of the young lady, the figure he had seen laid in its place, of her life with his mother and Fannet, of last Halloween, and of the 3 drops that had released her from her enchantment. She took up the story when he paused, and told how kind the mother and son had been to her. The parents could not make enough of Jamie. They treated him with every distinction, and when he expressed his wish to return to Fannet, said they did not know how to show their gratitude. But an awkward complication arose. The daughter would not let him go without her. If Jamie goes, I'll go too, she said. He saved me from the fairies. He's worked for me ever since. If it had not been for him, dear father and mother, you would never have seen me again. If he goes, I'll go too. This being her resolution, the old gentleman said that Jamie would become his son-in-law. The mother was brought from Fannet in a coach and 4, and there was a splendid wedding. They all lived together in the grand Dublin house, and Jamie was heir to untold wealth at his father-in-law's death. From Fannet to Dublin, that is Ireland to another. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense for the story. I hope you enjoyed that. So we're going to call that for tonight. We'll pick this up next time. But I hope y'all have been enjoying these stories. And thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time.